The city never truly slept, but it did grow quieter after midnight. When the yellow cabs thinned out and the sidewalks stopped belonging to suits and tourists and started belonging to the forgotten ones. Emma Calloway had learned that lesson in the worst possible way. Over the course of 6 months that had taken everything from her and left her with a single duffel bag, a broken phone, and a stubbornness that refused to let her cry in public. She was 31 years old, and she had once been the kind of woman who color-coded her planner and kept fresh flowers on her desk every Monday morning. She had worked her way up from receptionist to junior marketing director at Calloway & Pierce, a firm that had the same last name as her, not because she owned it, but because her father had founded it 30 years ago and then quietly signed it over to his business partner before dying of a stroke, leaving Emma with nothing but a surname that meant everything to everyone else and nothing legally to her. The partner, a thin, smiling man named Gerald Pierce, had kept her employed out of what she once believed was loyalty. She understood now that it had been guilt. The moment Gerald found a reason to restructure, Emma was the first name on the list. She lost her job on a Tuesday. She lost her apartment 3 months later when the savings dried up and the interview callbacks stopped coming. She had applied to 64 positions. She had counted. People looked at her resume and saw a marketing director title and assumed she was overqualified or overpaid or simply too much. She had started applying for waitressing positions and had been told she lacked recent experience. The world, she was learning, was very good at closing its doors precisely when you needed them open. The diner on Caraway Street was called Dolores' Home Kitchen, and it was exactly what the name suggested. Dolores Fitch was a round woman in her late 60s, with silver hair pinned in a loose bun and hands that always smelled faintly of cinnamon. She had been Emma's mother's closest friend. And when Emma's mother passed 4 years ago, Dolores had pressed a paper into Emma's hand at the funeral with her phone number and the words, "Call me if you ever need anything," written in purple ink. Emma had never called. She was too proud for that, and her mother had raised her to be independent. But when Emma found herself standing outside the diner on a wet October evening with her duffel bag and nowhere to go, she did not call. She simply stood there, looking at the yellow light through the window. And Dolores happened to look up from behind the counter and see her. She brought Emma inside without a word. She fed her chicken soup and cornbread and poured her coffee without asking questions. And then she said Emma could sleep in the back room where she stored dry goods, just until things sorted themselves out. Emma told herself it would be 1 week. That had been 6 weeks ago. She did not stay in the diner during the day because she did not want to be a burden and because Dolores already refused to let her pay for meals. During the days Emma walked, she looked for work. She sat in the public library and updated her resume on borrowed computer time. She kept herself clean using the library bathrooms in the small restroom behind Dolores' stockroom. She kept her pride intact the way you keep a candle lit in a windstorm. With both hands cupped around it and your whole body turned against the cold, it was on one of those cold October nights. A Thursday, 11:40 in the evening, that Emma found herself caught in a sudden downpour 3 blocks from the diner. She had stayed too long at the library, and the rain came out of nowhere, the kind that does not give you time to find shelter before it has already soaked through your jacket. She ducked under the narrow awning of an office building on Hartwell Avenue, pressing herself against the glass door and trying to decide whether she could run the remaining 3 blocks without losing her shoes to a puddle. She did not notice the man standing beside her until he spoke. He said, "Excuse me," in the tone of someone who was not actually asking to be excused but was announcing his presence so as not to startle her. And she turned to find a tall man in a charcoal coat with dark hair that the rain had pressed flat against his forehead. He was not classically handsome in the way magazine covers suggested a wealthy man should look. His face was slightly asymmetrical, jaw too strong on one side, nose with a faint old break in it. But his eyes were the kind of brown that looked black in low light. They were watching her with an expression she could not immediately classify. It was not pity. She had learned to recognize pity. It was something closer to curiosity. His name was Nathaniel Harlow, though she would not know that yet. To her in that moment, he was simply a man in a good coat, sharing an awning during a rainstorm. And she gave him the small polite nod that strangers exchanged and turned her attention. Back to the street, he said, "The rain does not look like it plans to stop." She said, "No, it does not." He said he could call her a car if she needed one. And the offer landed strangely because it was not delivered with the uncomfortable brightness of someone performing charity. It sounded like someone saying they could pass the salt. She told him she was fine, which was not entirely true. And he accepted this without argument, which surprised her. Most people, when they offered help and were declined, either pushed harder or made a face that said they had done their part, and now she was on her own. He simply nodded and looked back at the rain. They stood there for 4 minutes. She counted. Because she had a habit of counting things when she was nervous, and something about standing beside this particular stranger made her nervous in a way she could not immediately name. Then he said his driver was bringing the car around, and there was room. If she changed her mind, she did not change her mind immediately. She let another minute pass. Then a car the color of midnight pulled up to the curb, and a broad man in his 50s climbed out with an umbrella and walked it to the awning without being asked. The man beside her thanked him by name, Garrett. And Garrett opened the back door and waited. Emma watched this and then looked at the rain and then back at the car. And something in her chest that had been clenched for 6 months loosened. Just slightly. She said if it was truly no trouble. The man said it was truly no trouble. His name, Garrett told her cheerfully as they pulled into traffic, was Mr. Harlow. And he was the worst passenger Garrett had ever driven for because he never talked and always looked at his phone. The man in question told Garrett to mind his own business, and Garrett laughed, and Emma found herself almost smiling for the first time in longer than she could remember. She gave the address of the diner. When they arrived, Nathaniel Harlow walked her to the door under Garrett's umbrella, which she thought was unnecessary and did not say. At the door, she turned to thank him, and he was watching her with that same curious expression, and he asked if she was all right. Not in the performative way, but in the way of someone who actually wanted to know. She told him she had been better and she had been worse. And right now, she was somewhere in the middle, which was its own kind of fine. He looked at her for a moment, and then he reached into his coat and produced a business card, which he held out without pressing it on her. He said if she ever needed anything, and then he stopped, as though reconsidering the word anything.
Yes.
And said if she was ever looking for work, his company sometimes had openings. His assistant could be reached at the number on the card. Emma took the card because declining it felt like closing a door she was not sure she wanted closed. She said thank you, and he nodded, and Garrett wished her a good evening with the warmth of someone who had been wishing strangers good. Evenings for decades, it meant every one. And then the midnight-colored car pulled away into the rain. Emma stood in the doorway of Dolores' home kitchen and looked at the card in her hand. Harlow Industries. Nathaniel Harlow, Chief Executive Officer. The address on the card was the building she had been standing outside of. She looked up at it through the rain and thought about how strange the world was. How it could take everything from you and then, on a Thursday night in October, send a man with an umbrella and a card and eyes that did not look at her like she was a problem to be solved. She did not throw the card away. She tucked it into the inside pocket of her duffel bag, where she kept the things that mattered, her mother's photograph, a pen that still worked, and now this, and she went inside to the warmth that Dolores had left waiting for her. Outside, Garrett drove Nathaniel Harlow back through the rain, toward the penthouse on the 42nd floor, where he would eat reheated food alone and sit by the window looking at a city that had given him everything he had asked for, and somehow still felt like a place he did not quite belong to. And Garrett, who had driven him for 11 years and knew him better than anyone alive, watched him in the mirror and saw something different in his face tonight and said nothing. Because Garrett was wise enough to know that some things needed time to name themselves. The business card sat in Emma's duffel bag for 11 days before she touched it again. She was not the kind of woman who waited by the phone or invented reasons to reach out to strangers, even kind ones. She had spent those 11 days the way she spent all her days, walking the city, visiting the library, applying for positions that did not call back. She had an interview at a small public relations firm on the 9th day that went well enough to make her hopeful. And hope was a dangerous thing because it had a way of making the fall hurt twice as much when it came. The fall came on the 10th day, via email. They had decided to go with another candidate. Thank you for your time. On the 11th day, she took the card out and set it on the small folding table in Dolores' stockroom and looked at it while she drank her morning coffee. Dolores came in to check the inventory and saw the card and did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said that Nathaniel Harlow was the kind of name that showed up in the business section of the newspaper. And Emma said she knew, and Dolores said sometimes the universe sent things at the right time whether you felt ready or not. Emma picked up her phone and called the number on the card. The assistant who answered was brisk and professional and said Mr. Harlow had actually left a note in the system about this number, which Emma found startling, and that she should come in for an informal meeting that Thursday at 10 in the morning. Emma said that would be fine and hung up and sat very still for a moment. Feeling the strange sensation of a door swinging open, she borrowed a blouse from Dolores, a deep burgundy one that fit well enough, and wore it with the one pair of trousers she had kept pressed inside her. Loved a bag because some habits were too deeply formed to abandon. She arrived at Harlow Industries 14 minutes early and sat in the lobby on a chair that probably cost more than a month of her old rent and kept her back straight and her chin level, because she had learned that the way you held your body told other people how to treat you. Nathaniel Harlow came down from the elevator himself, which she had not expected. She had expected an assistant to take her to a conference room and offer her water and make her wait. Instead, he walked across the lobby, in a gray suit without a tie, and said good morning, Emma, as though they had known each other 4 years, and shook her hand with a firmness that was not performative. He took her to a corner office on the 36th floor with windows that looked out over the whole city, and she stood at those windows for a moment before she could stop herself, looking at the skyline she had been walking through at ground level for months. And something about seeing it from up here made her chest ache in a way she could not explain. He asked her about her background, without making her feel like she was being interviewed. He asked questions, and then actually listened to the answers, rather than preparing his next question while she spoke. She told him about her father's company and what happened after. And she told him about the 64 job applications and the PR firm that had chosen someone else. And she told him all of it plainly without making it a tragedy, because it was simply what had happened. And she had not yet decided what it meant. He told her he had an opening in his communications department, someone who could manage media relations and work on brand strategy. He named a salary. She kept her face still when he said the number, even though it was more than she had made at her previous job. She said she would need to think about it. He said, of course. Take a few days, and then he paused and said something she did not expect. He said he hoped wherever she was staying was comfortable. Not intrusively, just quietly, as though acknowledging that he remembered the rain and the diner without making it into something she needed to respond to. She said it was fine and thanked him and left. And in the elevator going down, she allowed herself 3 seconds of letting her composure slip, 3 seconds of pressing her hand against the mirrored wall and breathing, before she put herself back together and walked out into the lobby with her chin up. She accepted the position the following Monday. The first weeks at Harlow Industries were the kind that reminded Emma of who she had been before everything went sideways. She was sharp in meetings. She had good instincts about messaging and tone. She worked late not because she felt she had to prove herself, but because she genuinely liked the work. Liked having problems to solve and a desk to sit at and a reason to be somewhere. The team was small and good-natured and treated her without any of the strange wariness she had expected from people who worked for someone. Wealthy Nathaniel kept their interactions professional during office hours, which she respected. He would stop by her desk occasionally to ask a question or pass on a request, and he was direct and courteous and never hovered. But she noticed things about him the way she had always noticed things about people, an observational habit she could not switch off. She noticed that he ate lunch at his desk every day, and that his assistant brought him. It's the same order each time, and he never seemed to notice what he was eating. She noticed that he stayed later than anyone else, and was always the first car in the parking structure. She noticed that when people laughed in the hallway outside his office, his head would lift slightly. Not to find the source of the noise, but as though the sound reached something in him that was very far away. She'd been at the company for 3 weeks when she ran into him in the building's lobby at 7:30 in the evening. She was leaving late after finishing a press release, and he was standing near the entrance, looking at his phone with an expression of mild irritation. She asked if everything was all right. He said his dinner had been canceled. She said she was sorry to hear that. He said there was a decent Italian place 2 blocks over if she had not yet eaten. She had not yet eaten. The Italian place was warm and low-lit, and the bread came out without being asked for, which Emma believed was the single greatest quality a restaurant could possess. They talked for 2 hours. Not about work. About other things, about the books they had read as children, about the cities they had lived in, about the small, specific details of life that you only shared with someone when you forgot to be careful. He told her about growing up in a house where money was always the subject of every conversation, and how he had spent his adult life building wealth while never fully escaping the feeling that it was supposed to mean more than it did. She told him about her mother, about the years of watching her mother hold a family together through grief and difficulty, with a grace that Emma had spent her whole life trying to understand and replicate. He listened the way he listened in that first meeting completely. Without preparing his response, she found it disarming. Walking back to the office building where their separate cars waited, she made the mistake of glancing sideways at him in the dark and catching him looking at her. And the look on his face was something she filed away quickly in the part of her mind marked "not yet," because she was not in a position to open that particular door, and she suspected he was not either. Though she did not know why, she learned why 3 days later, when an envelope arrived at the office addressed to Nathaniel Harlow in handwriting that was too deliberate and lovely to be anything but significant. His assistant brought it in with the rest of the mail, and Emma happened to be in the office when he opened it. She watched him read whatever was inside, and watched his face do something complicated, a tightening around the jaw, a stillness in the eyes that was different from his usual stillness. Later that afternoon, Garrett mentioned it in passing, because Garrett mentioned everything in passing. He said Mr. Harlow had received the wedding invitation from his ex-fiancée that morning, and that he had been in a mood ever since. Emma asked who his ex-fiancée was, and Garrett said her name was Priscilla, and that she was the kind of beautiful that made rooms go quiet when she entered, but also the kind of woman who noticed that rooms went quiet and adjusted her entrance accordingly. He said she and Nathaniel had been engaged for 8 months 2 years ago, and that the ending had been quiet and very final, and that Nathaniel had not spoken of her since. Emma did not ask more questions. She went back to her desk and thought about the envelope and the complicated thing that had moved across his face, and told herself it was none of her business. That evening, Nathaniel came to her office door and knocked on the frame, which he always did even though the door was open. He said he had received a wedding invitation, and he was going to the ceremony, and he would like her to come with him as his guest. He said it plainly, the way he said most things. But there was something underneath it that was careful and deliberate. She looked at him for a moment. She asked whose wedding, he told her. She asked why he wanted to bring her. Specifically, he said because she was the person he most wanted to spend that afternoon with. And he said it without flinching, which made it very hard to argue with. She said she would need something to wear. He said that could be arranged. She said she did not want him to arrange it for her, that she would manage it herself, and he nodded and said of course. And she could see that he had expected this answer and respected it. Dolores, when Emma told her, put down the dish she was washing and dried her hands very slowly, and then said that Emma needed to borrow her good pearl earrings. Emma said she did not need pearl earrings. Dolores said every woman needed pearl earrings, and that this was not a discussion. The dress Emma found at a second-hand shop on Mercer Street was an evening blue that sat just off the shoulder and moved the way good fabric was supposed to move. It cost $42 and fit as though it had been made for her. She stood in front of the small mirror in Dolores's stockroom the morning of the wedding and looked at herself. Really looked for the first time in a long time. And she decided that whatever happened today, she was going to walk into that room like someone who belonged everywhere she stood. Garrett picked her up from the diner. because she had not yet given anyone at the office her living situation, and she was not ready to. He whistled low when she came out and said Mr. Harlow was going to need a moment to collect himself, and Emma told him to stop. And Garrett said he was simply making an observation. Nathaniel was waiting at the car in a dark suit that fit him the way good suits fit men who had spent years not noticing what they were. Warren had finally found something worth wearing. When he saw her, he went still in the way she recognized now, that brief pause before he resumed being himself. He said she looked remarkable. She said, so did he. Garrett made a small sound from the front seat that could have been a cough. The wedding venue was a converted estate outside the city. All white stone and iron gates and flower arrangements that cost more than Emma's quarterly salary had once been. They arrived together and walked through those gates together, and every head in the entrance hall turned. Priscilla was standing near the floral arch with her maid of honor, Clara, a sharp-faced woman who had the expression of someone perpetually waiting to be offended. Emma saw Priscilla notice them. She watched the smile on Priscilla's face do something small and sharp, and she straightened her spine by exactly half an inch and walked forward, beside Nathaniel Harlow like she had always been, exactly here. And she did not look away. The estate's grand hall smelled of white roses and expensive candles, the kind of fragrance that was designed to suggest old money without ever announcing it. Emma took all of this in as she moved through the entrance beside Nathaniel, noting the way the polished guests looked at her, their eyes moving from her face to her dress to her escort and back again, running rapid calculations that she had no interest in watching complete themselves. Clara appeared at their side almost immediately. She had the speed of someone who had been waiting. She kissed Nathaniel's cheek and said how wonderful that he had come, and she said it warmly, enough that only someone paying very close attention would hear the slight emphasis on he, the implication being that the wonderful part was specifically and only him. Then she looked at Emma with a smile that was generous, the way a winter morning is generous. Technically present but offering no actual warmth, she said she did not think she had met Nathaniel's friend. Emma introduced herself by name, clearly the way her mother had taught her, looking Clara directly in the eyes and not offering anything extra. Clara said how lovely and turned back to Nathaniel and began a conversation about mutual acquaintances. That excluded Emma by design rather than accident. Emma recognized the technique. She had worked in corporate environments. She had sat in meetings where someone tried to make you invisible through the strategic direction of attention. She let it happen for exactly 40 seconds, which was polite. And then she excused herself without apology to find her seat, because she had nothing to prove to Clara, and a great deal of energy she preferred to spend elsewhere. She found the seating arrangement on a board near the entrance and located her name on a card at a table near the back, which she suspected was not an accident. She went and sat there and helped herself to water from the crystal pitcher and watched the room. Phil Nathaniel appeared beside her shortly after and sat down without commentary. Though she could tell from the set of his jaw that he had noticed the seating arrangement, she told him quietly that it did not matter. He said it mattered to him. She told him to let it go, that rooms like this fed on reactions. And he looked at her for a moment with that expression she was becoming fluent in, the one that meant he was recalibrating something. The ceremony was beautiful the way ceremonies always are when enough money has been applied to the setting. Priscilla came down the aisle in a gown that was clearly the result of many months and significant funds. And she was exactly as Garrett had described, the kind of beautiful that reorganized a room. Emma watched Nathaniel watch her, and she watched him do it honestly without looking away. And she saw him process whatever he was feeling with the quiet thoroughness of someone who had already done most of that work beforehand. When Priscilla reached the altar, he looked away. He looked at Emma. She did not say anything. Neither did he. But something passed between them that settled. The groom, Brandon Weston, was broad-shouldered and expensively groomed and had the manner of a man who had been told he was impressive so many times he'd stopped checking whether it was true. He smiled throughout the ceremony with the confidence of someone who had won something. Emma thought about her father's business partner, Gerald Pierce. about how some men move through the world collecting things and calling it living, and she felt something very close to peace about not being one of the things. Being collected. During the reception, the trouble started. As trouble usually did, with a comment dressed as a compliment, Clara found them again near the drinks table. She had brought 2 other women with her, the kind who moved in formation. She told Emma that her dress was so interesting, said it with a tilt of the head that was meant to strip the word interesting of anything good. She said she supposed it was very brave to wear something so simple to a wedding like this. Emma took a sip of her water and said that she found simplicity usually lasted longer than ornamentation. One of the women with Clara made a small sound. Clara's smile tightened. Then Clara said something that crossed a line Emma had been willing to let exist. She said she had heard that Nathaniel had quite the gift for charitable impulses these days. She said it, looking directly at Emma. She said she supposed it was admirable, bringing someone along who would not otherwise have the opportunity. The room nearby went quiet in the way rooms did when someone said something too sharp in public and the people around them were deciding whether to pretend. They had not heard. Emma set her glass down on the table very carefully. She was not angry, or rather she was angry the way a river is angry, controlled by the banks on either side, going exactly where it intended to go. She looked at Clara and said that she appreciated the concern, but that she had been managing her own opportunities for 31 years without assistance and expected to continue doing so. She said she had built a career from nothing twice over, which was something she imagined required a kind of effort that might not be immediately obvious to someone who had started with everything already in place. She said it calmly. She said it with a slight smile. She said it the way her mother had taught her to say hard things, as though they were simply facts being reported. Clara had no answer that would not make things worse for her. She took her formation and left. Nathaniel was standing 2 feet to Emma's left, and he had not moved during any of this. When Clara walked away, he looked at Emma, an expression that was not pity or admiration, but something that encompassed both and went further than either. He said he would have stepped in. She told him she knew, and that she had not needed him to. He said he knew she had not needed him to, and that watching her handle it herself has been something he was going to think about for a long time. Priscilla found them before dinner. She came alone, without Clara. And she came with the careful deliberateness of a woman who had made a decision and was going through with it before she could change her mind. She looked at Emma first, really looked, and Emma held her gaze without hostility, because hostility required an investment she was not willing to make. Priscilla said to Nathaniel that she was glad he had come. She said it genuinely, Emma thought. Then she said she hoped he was well. He said he was better than he had been in a while. Priscilla's eyes moved briefly to Emma and then back. She gave a small nod, the kind that conceded something without naming it. And she said she was glad, and she meant that too. And then she went back to her wedding. At dinner, Nathaniel's older brother Theo appeared at their table uninvited, pulling up a chair with the entitlement of someone who had never questioned his right to take up space. He was older than Nathaniel by 7 years, silver at his temples, and he had the Harlow jaw without any of Nathaniel's irregular humanity. He looked at Emma with frank assessment and said he had not heard Nate was seeing anyone. Nathaniel said he had not announced it. Theo said he supposed the circumstances were unconventional and left the word circumstances open on the table like a trap. Emma watched Nathaniel look at his brother for a long moment. Then Nathaniel said the circumstances were that he had met someone who made every room more interesting and every conversation worth having, and that he had brought her here today because he wanted her here and not for any other reason. And he said it without raising his voice or looking away from his brother. Theo blinked. He said that was all very well and excused himself. He did not come back. Emma looked at Nathaniel after his brother left and said that had been well handled. He said he had been practicing it in his head all morning. She laughed, and it came out fuller than she intended. Warm and real, and the couple at the next table looked over and smiled the way people smile when they hear a sound that reminds them of something good. After dinner, they walked out to the estate gardens, following the path of lit lanterns that led through the rose hedges to a small stone terrace overlooking the grounds. The city was visible in the distance, a faint shimmer of light against the dark sky. Emma stood at the terrace railing and breathed in the cool air and felt, with a clarity that surprised her, that she had arrived somewhere, not at this terrace. At something harder to name, Nathaniel stood beside her and said nothing for a while, which was one of the things she liked best about him. He did not fill silence with noise. He understood that some moments were not broken by speaking, but by the wrong kind of speaking. Then he said he wanted to tell her something, and she said all right. He said that he had spent a long time building things he thought would feel like enough, and that none of them had, and that he had stopped expecting them to, and that this was something he had made his peace with. He said that the night he stood under an awning in the rain with her, he had not been looking for anything. He said the strange thing about finding something when you are not looking is that you do not have a framework for it, no prepared speech, no elegant presentation. He said all he had was the honest observation that since she had come into his life, the city felt different and dinners did not feel like maintenance, and mornings did not feel like something to get. Through Emma listened to all of this. She was very still. Then she said that she had lost a great deal in the past year. Her job, her home, her sense of the future as something she could predict or count on. She said that losing those things had been terrible and also clarifying the way a fire clears ground. She said she knew now with a certainty she had not had before exactly what she valued and what she did not, and that she had not expected to find herself standing in a garden, at a wedding, learning that what she valued included a man who carried an umbrella for strangers and remembered how people took their coffee and listened when she talked. She turned to look at him, and he was watching her with that serious, patient attention, and she said she was not finished rebuilding yet, that there were still things she needed to do for herself before she gave her energy anywhere else. She said she hoped he understood that. He said he understood completely, and that he was not asking her to stop building anything. He said he was simply asking if, while she built, he might stand near enough to be useful occasionally. She considered this for a moment. The lanterns swayed slightly in the evening breeze. Somewhere inside the estate the music had started, a slow and unhurried song. She said that being occasionally useful was acceptable as a starting point. The corner of his mouth moved, and she recognized it as the closest he came to outright joy without preparation. He offered her his arm, and she took it, and they went back inside, not rushing, not performing anything, simply two people moving through a room together. With the particular ease of people who had decided to trust something new, Garrett saw them come in and said nothing. But when he caught Emma's eye from across the room, he winked once with the satisfaction of someone who had seen exactly what he expected to see and found it better than anticipated. Clara watched from across the hall with the expression that had run out of ammunition. Priscilla watched from the dance floor with a look that was complicated, and honest, and somewhere between relief and the particular kind of sadness that comes with understanding that a chapter has genuinely ended, and that the person who closed it as well, Theo, did not watch at all. He had left early, which was exactly right. When Garrett drove them back to the city that evening, the radio was playing something low and unhurried, and the city came up around them with all its light and noise, and Emma watched it through the window, feeling the unfamiliar sensation of not bracing for what came next. She had spent 6 months expecting the floor to fall out from under her. She had held herself rigid against whatever was coming. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, she let herself simply sit in the car and let the city go by, not try to calculate anything. Nathaniel was quiet beside her. Not the empty quiet of a man with nothing to say, but the full quiet of one who had said what needed saying and was content to let it rest. Garrett pulled up in front of Dolores' home kitchen, because it was still where Emma called home, and he made no comment about this whatsoever, which was its own kind of grace. Emma gathered her wrap and reached for the door, and then stopped and said to Nathaniel that she would see him Monday. He said Monday. She opened the door and stepped out into the night air, her blue dress catching the light from the diner window. The pearl earrings, Dolores had insisted on catching it too. She did not look back. But she heard Garrett say something quietly, and heard Nathaniel answer. and she heard in his voice the thing she was beginning to recognize as happiness, careful and new and held gently. The way you hold something you did not expect to receive and are not yet sure how to keep, but intend very much to try. Dolores was still at the counter when Emma came in. She looked up and took in the dress and the earrings in Emma's face, and she did not ask a single question. She just poured 2 cups of coffee and pushed one across the counter and sat down on the stool beside the register. And Emma sat on the other side and wrapped her hands around the warm cup. After a while, Dolores said, "Well," Emma said, "Well," and they sat there in the warm kitchen light. 2 women who had known loss and were still standing, and outside the city went on being itself, enormous and indifferent, and full of doorways that opened when you had stopped expecting them to. And Emma Calloway, who had once lost everything and rebuilt herself out of stubbornness and borrowed coffee in one purple ink address on a funeral day, sat quietly with the beginning of something good and let herself, for the first time in a very long time, believe that it would stay.